All right. Starting where you are. So in my genealogy, there's some pastors. My father was a pastor. I have a grandfather who was a pastor. On my mom's side, I have a great something that was a circuit rider in Arkansas, in that area. And so that growing up in that household, there's that. It's kind of ingrained that reaching out and it's just kind of it's just a natural thing. So when I was young, I was 7 years old when I first accepted Jesus into my heart, and I wanted to be a missionary in China. If you asked me what I was going to do, I was going to be a missionary in China. Of course, around that same time, around 7, I wanted to go to Egypt where Jesus was born. So my geology was not real. It wasn't real good. Didn't understand where places were. So probably good that I didn't go to China. But I had this heart. I wanted to serve God. I knew who He was and what He was to me. And so as junior high, and I saw my dad just reach out again and again to the lost and broken. He'd ping people home. He brought a motorcycle gang to church once. So he just had this heart to reach out to the broken. And so when I was in junior high, I would walk to school and to the junior high, and I would pass this elementary school. And one morning there was this girl. She was standing by the fence of the playground, and she was crying. And so I stopped, and I was like, "What's the matter?" And I looked down at her feet, and she had these cute little patent leather shoes, and but no socks in her feet. It was December, and her feet were just beet red cold. And I was like, "Where are your socks?" And she's like, "Well, I don't have any." I go, "Well, meet me here tomorrow at the same time, and I have something for you." So the next morning, I got ready to go to school, and I put like 6 pairs of socks in my coat pocket. And I walked to school, and when I got to that part, I waited for her, and I gave this girl these socks, because I knew that meeting those practical needs was just something that my dad and my family had just kind of encouraged. Now, during that same season, I did tell the little girl that lived next to me that going to her church on a regular basis did not keep her from hell unless she got saved. She did throw me in the mud. So at that point, I realized there was a cost to sharing the gospel. Over the years, I did learn that sharing truth, as well as using a little tact and a little gentleness, it works a lot better. So I learned. I'm kind of a quick learner, slower. Yeah, okay. So a lot like I was thinking of the Samaritan woman. So the Samaritan woman, she goes to the well. Jesus is there, and Jesus asks for a drink. And first she explains to him, "I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew, and so why are you asking me?" So then he says, "Well, if you knew who I was, you would have asked me for that water where you'll never thirst again." And he began to engage her and draw her in, and she began to realize that maybe he had something she really needed. And so she's like, "Well, I want this water." And he goes, "Okay." He said, go get your husband." And her response is, "Well, I don't have a husband." And he's like, "That's a good answer, because you've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now is not your husband." And it was like, he kind of exposed her heart. And then he began to talk to her about worship and about how to worship and what God's looking for. And so then she was like engaging more and more, and he was just drawing her in. And she goes, "Well, there's a Messiah coming, and he's going to explain all this to us." And he said, "I'm the one. I'm that Messiah." So about that time, the disciples show up, and she leaves her jar there, and she goes back to her town. And she begins to tell people, "Hey, there's this guy that I met, and he told me everything. And I think he might be the Messiah." He began to get that revelation. She got that revelation of who this man might be. And so the people, they came out to see Jesus. And the word says that some of them, they believed because of what she said. They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Our testimony, our experience of who God is, how he's met us, what he's shown us. There's power in that testimony of sharing those truths. And then as people went to meet him, then they began to tell her in verse that we don't only believe because of what you've said, we believe because of we've heard him as well. We've heard him, and we know that this man is from God. And so just like Peter in the verses that we have for the conference, they had that same revelation that you are the Messiah. You're the one that we need. You're the one that we've been looking for. And so she had that revelation. And as we gain that revelation, that's where we start where we are. What God has shown us and has revealed to us, that's what we pour out of. That's what we give out of. So I've been a prayer walker, prayer driver. I don't know. When I lived in Fairbanks and when I lived in Palmer, one of the things that I just have this unction to do, I don't know why, but I usually drive around the city limits. I always want to find a map. I don't know why. And I drive around the city limits. I want to pray, and I want to pray around the whole city, and I want to, just ask God, what do you have for this place? And so back in 2014, when I was in Palmer, God began to give me this unction to go and pray around the city, and then I would go down to downtown Palmer at Cartier Plaza, and I would pray every morning 7:30 to 9. And I don't know why that season was like that. If anyone knew me in my young adult life, getting up at 7 o'clock every morning to do anything if I didn't have a job was not a real thing. So I knew that was God for me to do that every single morning and go down there and pray for my city. And God even gave me, I would pray for the government. I would pray for the schools. I would pray for the police, for organizations, for businesses. And as God began to do that, I began to pray and say, God, what do you have for this city? And so during that season, me and my husband went and looked at this little building in downtown Palmer. And there was this ministry that was on my heart. And it was about getting back to work. So we went, and through a series of things of having no money and no real organization, a landlord gave us 2 months free rent and no deposit and said, let's see what God does. And so I said, sure. And so we began this organization. But right away, when you say yes to Jesus, sometimes it's a setup. I'm just warning you up front. Because what we were saying yes to, we were saying yes to, an organization that would help people get back to work. But right away, within the first couple of weeks of having our doors open, we began to be introduced to the homeless people in our valley. And if you would have told me, if I would have thought before that that's what we were going to be engaging in, I would have there's homeless people in Palmer? Are you sure? So we had this couple come in, and we did this work program, and in the work program, 80% of the women were homeless that did that work program in the first year. One of the very first ones was a young lady who was living in her car, and she showed up the first morning, and we had it set up. We had 3 weeks of the work program, and we had people from the church bringing in a meal at lunchtime so they would have food. And so she came in, and it was pretty obvious she was leading a car. She could have used some clean clothes and stuff. And when we had lunch, she just devoured her lunch. And I was like, and then when we were done, she's like, are those leftovers? What are you going to do with those leftovers? And I was like, well, if you want them, you can have them. I was like, when was the last time you ate? She goes, well, it's been 2 or 3 days, but I'm good. So we gave her the leftovers. And then she missed a day, and she came back, and she showed up again, and she was kind of bruised up. And she sat there, and I asked her how she was doing. And I said, we want you to come every day. She goes, yeah. She goes, but I'm glad that when I do come, there's somebody that's glad to see me. There's someone that's glad I'm here. And I get that every time I come. I know I'm not making it every day like you want, but when you come, it's like you're always glad. And so giving out of where you're at is so easy, because it's just, if you're walking with Jesus, he's given you something. He's given you salvation. He's given you hope. He's given you freedom. He's given you transformation. And sharing that truth with a lost and broken world. When I was praying for Palmer during that season, at one point I had this kind of a picture of this fire sweeping through our valley. And that fire was, God says in Hebrews, I'm a consuming fire. And that fire was consuming all that was not him. And then it was purifying all that was, all the gifts and the talents and the purpose that God has put in each of us. He was purifying those things and making them shine. And then I saw these points of light throughout the valley. And as I began to pray, it was like each point of light was an individual that was walking and serving the King, that fire burning. And they were in the workplace, they were in the schools, they were teachers, they were in our government, they were all over the place. And the thing about fire is, one, it brings light and illumination. It brings warmth. It draws people in. And the other thing, when it's used properly, it will start other things on fire. And that's what happens when God draws people in and you're that point of light. You're having that heart for your work. It's not just a workplace, but the Spirit of God living in you, the presence of Jesus Christ in you allows you to be that point of light. And wherever you're at, that ministry of presence, of being there and bringing Jesus into everything we do. And that point of light is just, it can cause more fire and more fire. And that's what we want. And so as we started Connect Palmer and we began to see the need and the homeless, and especially with women, we had the downstairs was their training center where we helped them with jobs and computers and all that. And then an apartment opened up upstairs. And as the people were moving out, my husband had stopped by the office, and he was like, well, do you go to the landlord or do I? Because we knew that God had introduced us to this population for a reason. When he brings something into your preview and he's putting a light on it, ask him if he's wanting you to touch it, to address it, to look for those opportunities to make a difference. And so we went and we rented that apartment, we painted it, we started inviting women in it. And God began to pour out his love in his Spirit. And one of the reasons we have it is that it felt like God showed us, Sarah, whenever she heard, when Abraham was told, in a year, you're going to have a baby. And she was behind the tent and she laughed. And I really felt God wanted that we laugh sometimes, all of us, in unbelief when God shares us promises. You don't understand. I'm not qualified. I don't have, you don't know what's happened to me. You don't know what I've done. And God's saying, no, I wanted a place where my daughters can sit and get to know me and learn that my promises are for them. They're for today. It doesn't matter what's happened. It doesn't matter where they've been. It matters who I say they are, and it matters that they come to me, and I want them to learn that. I want them to know that. And so we started bringing women in. We've housed over 80 women at Sarah's house in the last 5 years. It has been quite the adventure, and I've learned there's so many mornings. We do devotions every morning from 8 to 9 o'clock, and I sit down with 1 to 6 women, and it is such a privilege because when you say yes, then God can give you those opportunities to sit with women or that just open their lives up to me in a way that I just am humbled because they let me into their life, their hurts, their past, and they allow me and the people who work with us and the people who partner with us, they allow us to introduce them to the answer, to the Messiah, to the King. And we get to share from our hearts and from the Word and from the community of the body of Christ, the truth and the hope of the gospel. And seeing those lives, over time change. We've had women who have graduated. They've gotten their kids back from OCS. They've had their life. They've gotten jobs and started working when they haven't worked in years and years. I had one of the first ladies come back who hadn't worked like in 12 years. She had got a job while she was in our program. She moved out. She got an apartment. And about 4 years later, she came back and she brought me this little check. She said, it's not much, but you changed everything by introducing me to Jesus. And so that's a privilege to be a part of that. So when you say yes to God and you say yes to being used where you are, just look around. There's people on your workplace. There's people on the street. There's people at the grocery store. During that season when I was praying for the city a lot, I found myself, I was walking into my office, and one of our Palmer Council women pulled up beside me, and she got out, and she's like, I need prayer. And so those opportunities, when you say yes, God, what do you want to do? How do you want to reveal yourself? Because that's what he wants. He wants to make this revelation to each one of us about how much he loves us and how much he cares. And so when we open up ourselves and say, yes, how do you want me to be part of helping you reveal yourself to the community around me? Then he's going to open doors that you never knew were there. And as we walk this thing out now, we did our first missions trip. So it's always been my vision with Connect Palmer to raise up these women and send them out. Well, this summer, one of our gals who graduated and is now serving as an intern, her mentor, who is my daughter and my son, all went to a mission trip to the Bonnets up in Pedro Bay, and they worked and served there. And that was it made my heart glad to see that what God was doing, that it has that ripple effect to go out farther and farther. And as you sow that seed, as you water those plants, as you share that truth and that hope, as you give, then God just uses it, and it just goes farther and farther and farther and impacts the world with the goodness of his word and his love. So just be willing to say yes. Be willing to plant where you are. If God calls you to China, make sure you know where it's at. And that's always helpful, know where you're going. And but just be willing to say yes to whatever he puts on your heart. And that's all.